Okay, welcome, Bruchim Abayim, Morai Rabotai. This is going to be the first of a series of Shiurim Be'ezrat Hashem on Sefer Mesillat Yesharim. Mesillat Yesharim is perhaps one of the greatest works of Musar ever published in the history of the Jewish people. That's not just what I'm saying. I have been saying this for years and years until I found that Reb Chaim Volozhiner, the legendary student of the Vilna Gaon, when his student was leaving Volozhin, he said, what Musar Sefer I should learn? So he said, all the Musar Sfarim are great, but if you want something really, really amazing, there is no second to Mesillat Yesharim. That's what you should spend your time on. And it said in the name of the Vilna Gaon himself that when he saw the first print of Mesillat Yesharim, he went out of his way to buy it with a dinar zahav. Was a tremendous amount of money. He paid like 10 times over price. He was so excited for this sefer. And again, we know Vilna Gaon was not a person that was flatterer in any shape or form. Perhaps the greatest name in the list of the Acharonim of the post-medieval authorities is the Vilna Gaon. Is an undisputed Geon Acharonim. And he said that if he had the Ramchal alive, he would go on foot to greet his presence. That's how impressed he was by Mesillat Yesharim.
I left the sefer to other
Amazing, that's fine. That's fine. We'll take care of it, yes.
All right?
Yeah.
And I already let him know that you have to bring a sefer tomorrow.
Okay. Chazak, I'll take care of it. So that's the tremendous thing that you have from the Ramchal. Said by the Geonei Ador, by Reb Chaim Volozhiner, by the Vilna Gaon. But I have personally a certain affinity towards Mesillat Yesharim because this is the first sefer I learned myself, taught myself Hebrew through it, and it's something that has impacted my life in perhaps the most magnificent and profound way. So it's something that's very close to my heart, very close to home, and it's a zchut, an honor to have the shiur and to be able to teach it. Now, Ramchal, Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, was a tremendous personality of Torah, already from a young age. He was a gaon at age 13 already. People were writing letters to him to tell him the Shoresh Neshama. You're talking about his Rebbe, Ma'ari Basan, or the Gedolei Ador of the generation. He was writing letters to him in his teens already. He turned the table around. From being a student of Ma'ari Basan, he became the mentor and the person that he looked up to. And people wrote about him, Ra'inu Elohim Olim Min Haaretz, that we saw is like a tremendous gadlut coming up from this young teenager that he was. He lived a short life. Unfortunately, he was subject to a lot of hatred from people of his generation because of the fear that they had from a success of a young Mikubal. This is post Shabtai Tzvi. Imagine to yourself, Shabtai Tzvi was a very young personality. He was extremely charismatic, and he made a lot of trouble. I mean, just a quick encapsulation of the history of Shabtai Tzvi was, in the Sephardi countries, he went from place to place. He was rejected in the beginning. People felt that he was dangerous, but then at the end, what happened was he coupled up with a fellow called Natan HaAzati, who became his Navi Sheker, so to speak. And Natan HaAzati was a magnificent Gaon. Magnificent Gaon. I mean, people had a meeting between Natan HaAzati and Reb Chaim Abulafia, who was one of the Geonei Ador, and Reb Chaim Abulafia and him met for 10 hours. For 10 hours, and he came out, he was flabbergasted. He said, I've never seen a Gaon like this. Any question, any kasha that I have, I say it to him, and he right away has 15 different ways of answering it. It's nothing like this, but he said he's not Mashiach. Reb Chaim Abulafia said, it doesn't sound right. And we all know what happened with Shabtai Tzvi. Thousands of people were drawn after him, believing that he is Mashiach. You should understand something. Being Mashiach is an old business. There's nothing new. In the time of Rambam, there were multiple that Rambam writes about. The multiple false Mashiachim in the time of Rambam that Rambam writes. Of course, the most famous of all is the one in Yemen, in Teman, that Rambam writes actually to them. There was this fellow that claimed that he was Mashiach, and the people in Teman asked the question to Rambam how to deal with him. And Rambam was very smart. He said, this guy was drawing everyone after himself, and people were almost ready to revolutionize the Jewish community and go against the king of Teman. Rambam said, quickly, that's what you got to do. You got to go to the king and say, this guy is out of his mind. He's crazy. He's mishuga. He's a schizophrenic, and therefore, Rahmanut alav, just put him in jail, and you'll be safe, he'll be safe, and it will be good. It's just genius if you think about that. Now, that's the letter. This is printed in Igrota Rambam, in the letters of Rambam. We don't know what happened afterwards with this guy, but if you read the rest of the letters of Rambam, he had another question that Rabbi Pinchas HaDayan asked him. This was a Dayan of Alexandria in Egypt. He asked him how to deal with his Mashiach Sheker. You see, I'm telling you, this was like a very popular business. People became Mashiach Sheker. So he tells them, he says, well, I had a few years ago a guy in Teman. So he references what happened in Yemen. So I had this guy in Teman that he claimed he's Mashiach, and I told him what to do, but you know what happened at the end? He says the rest of the story. He says, he was captured, he was brought to the king. The king said, I heard you're Mashiach. He said, yes, your majesty. He said, what is your ness? What is your, miracle that you could do? He said, miracle, sure, cut off my head and I won't die. Can you imagine? Right? So the king said, amazing, be my guest. I'll be your first chassid. If I cut off your head and you don't die, I will convert to Judaism and I'll become your first chassid. And then Rambam says, Tehe mitato kapara al kulanu. So they cut off his head and he died. Oops, problem. But that's what happened. You had this crazy, there are crazy people around. So Shabtai Tzvi was one of them. He was not fully crazy in that way, but he was charismatic, and his pair up with this Natan Hazati, Natan Hanavi they called him, was what multiplied the damage by 10x, if not more. He had a following, and then at the end he went off the path. He married a Muslim, and it's just, people committed suicide. It was horrible. The damage was irreversible, because even after his death, his students, until 2 generations after, at least, there were 2 generations after, was Yaakov Frank. There was this guy called Jacob Frank. For those of you who don't know the history, he probably made more damage than Shabtai Tzvi. Not time for going into the details of it. So people were very sensitive to young people who did Kabbalah, and they were very popular. The 2 main subjects of this hatred, and that they really got damaged by it, was one, Rabbi Yonatan Eibshitz. He was a tremendous gaon. I mean, if I tell you stories of his childhood genius, it's hard to believe things that you hear from people who experienced him in person. What an unreal genius he was. He was a very young person, and he was writing kmiot for people and this. And Rabbi Yaakov Emden, the Yabetz, he chased him out of town. It was a massive fight between them, because he was afraid that maybe this young budding Mekubal is another copy of Shabtai Tzvi. Nobody knew. Shabtai Tzvi looked like a legit person until he made all the damage. The second person that was subject to this type of hatred, and he was chased out of town, was Ramchal, unfortunately. Ramchal was, as I said, a very young person, extremely talented, in a non-real way. he was not your regular typical genius. He was way more than your typical genius, and he was very, very successful in his early teens already. He was written to by Gedolei Israel in their 70s and 80s, and not just asking them regular questions, that too, but they were asking him, "What's my shoresh neshama? Tell me what my thing is. Tafkid is in this." And these are big people that asked him these types of questions, not like regular Rabbi and Pico Robertson. It was like Mari Basan, Gidolei Ador. Imagine Chacham Obadia writing to somebody that type of a letter, and the guy is 13 years old. So he was chaste. He started writing something called Zohar Tinyana, a second Zohar. That's the caliber we're talking about, and he was in his 30s, right? He only lived to his 40s. He was 40 years old when he died of malaria. Him and his family, they had to fled to Eretz Israel, and it was the swamps. It was not a good situation. Unfortunately, he passed away. His family passed away. It was not a good ending for the Ramchal, but nevertheless, he wrote many Sfarim in the language of Kabbalah. But when he started being chased after, he started writing Sfarim that were simple to understand, even though that their content carries all of the weight of Kitvei Ari HaKadosh and the Kabbalistic works behind them. In other words, when you read Mesillat Yesharim, you think you're reading amazing work, which it is, and it's simple to understand Hebrew, but there are so many details that he's covering with regular language, which really could be explained and should be explained in a much deeper level and a deeper layer of Kitvei Ari HaKadosh. The example, the most magnificent example for that is his work called Da'at Tevunot, and of course Derech Hashem, which is like an encapsulation and a summary of Da'at Tevunot. But Da'at Tevunot Chelek Aleph is the primary example of that. If you take a look, Reb Chaim Friedlander, in the green prints of the Da'at Tevunot, in the back he has corresponding language of Kitvei Arizal with the language of the Ramchal inside, and then when you compare them, you will be blown away how much he's putting in every sentence. Everything that he writes there is basically Kabbalah watered down in a regular language that a person that understands Hebrew could read it and understand it, but really he's explaining the highest and most complex and abstract concepts of Kabbalah in his simply put words that are there, which to me it just tells you about the genius of Ramchal in such an unmatched way. You don't have anything else that is so precise. There aren't any extra words in Mesillat Yesharim or any extra words in Derech Hashem. His words are concise, are precise, and are counted and measured in such unbelievable way. So it's a zchut to read it. This is a book that has changed my life, and I hope it does the same to people who take this seriously. And the reason I say take it seriously is what he's going to say in his Hakdama, which we're going to start Bezrat Hashem right now. He writes in the beginning, in the introduction to his Mesillat Yesharim, Amar HaMechaber. He says, "Hachibur hazeh lo chibartiv lelamed livnei adam et asher lo yadeu." I am not authoring a book to teach you new things. That's not the purpose of what I'm doing here. Now, he acknowledges that maybe a thing or two that you learn new. The truth of the matter is there will be hundreds, if not thousands, of new things you will learn. But what he means is there are a lot of things that I'm going to say that you know. Are you going to start rolling your eyes when you read them? Because my purpose is not to teach new things, he says, but I am going to be reminding people what they already know. And it is well known to them, Pirsum Gadol. This is something that you already know. And it's well known. It's not just that you know it. It is so pashut, it's so simple to you, that if I ask you, you'll say, of course, what do you mean? What's even the question? In the majority of what I'm going to write, says the Ramchal, you won't find things that most people know them, velo mistabekim bahem klal. They have no doubts in them. He's going to give examples. Elashkvir rov pirsumam, but because they are so well known and they are so simple to people, and because their truth is not questioned by people, exactly because of that, you will be forgetting them and turning away from them, not paying attention to them very much. And you become forgetful and you don't pay attention to them. And therefore, I'll give examples to this. This is something that people know. Many important things in life are pushed away because of urgent things. Things that are in your face, you have to do checklists and so on and so forth. You do them. But things that are important, oftentimes they become pushed away because, of course, if you ask somebody, are your children more important or your friends? Would there be anybody that would say, my friends are more important than my children? Would there anybody that would say that? Or your wife or your friends? But then you're at home, you're having dinner with the family, and your friend calls. What do? Do you pick up or do you not pick up? Do you text them back or do you not text them back? So what just happened right now? If you would stop the guy and say, well, your kid's more important than your friends. So of course my kids. So why are you picking up the phone? Spending time. The only 45 minutes that you have, hour that you have with your kids. Why are you picking the phone? There's no answer. There is no answer to that. The reason for it is because we don't think. It's so pashut for us that the kids are important that we don't pay attention to the fact that this is priority. This is something that is important for me to focus on. Because you see them every day, so you don't pay attention to the fact that they are important. If the guy would be coming from a travel after a year, or people who come out of prison, whatever it is, and they have the first dinner with the family, you think they're going to be picking up the phone? Absolutely not. I hope not. Because they're not taking it for granted. It's the same thing, but you take it for granted when it happens all the time. When it's something that you have front and center, then you would pay attention to it. When you put it on the back burner because it's so pashut, so simple in your mind, then you would not pay attention to it. And you end up not prioritizing the priorities of life, not because they're not important to you, but on the contrary, says the Ramchal, because it's pashut that they're so important, you don't pay attention. It's an irony. It's an ironic thing that our brain does automatically, that things that are very important to us, we ignore. Why? Because we say, in our mind, automatically it says, it's pashut, of course this is most important. Check, 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 check. So you don't spend time on it. Because of course this is my priority life. Of course my wife is a priority. Of course my kids are a priority. So I don't need to spend so much time on it. That's the brain's automatic reaction, but it's wrong. Because if it is the priority, if it is the most important thing, you must be spending the most time on it. And you have to have reminders for it. And the Ramchal says this is what we do in our Avodat Hashem as well. The things that are the most important end up being the most ignored things, not because they're not important. You ask anybody, they will tell you, of course this is the most important. But when it comes to actually putting it front and center and prioritizing them, none of us do it. None of us. To the degree that Reb Chaim Volozhiner speaks about this, Marchur, Reb Chaim Vital speaks about this. In Sharek it says, people, the main mitzvah v'ahavta l'ra'acha kamocha is with your wife, with your husband. You know why? Because when you come home, it's nice to be nice to people outside, and people do it because it's important to be nice. You come home, this is my wife, it's my children. So there's a certain comfort zone. He said, of course, they're priority. So you end up not being as nice to them as you are outside. And not because it's not important to you. On the contrary, because you know it's pashut in your mind that this is my priority, that you think you don't have to spend time focusing on it and actually developing that relationship that you have. So now all Mesillat Yesharim is going to do right now for the next page is bring this concept to a reality in our minds, in our lives, of how this actually happens. So says the Mesillat Yesharim, therefore, therefore, reading this book one time is not going to be very beneficial. Yeah, you get the idea, but it's not going to actually work. If you want a workshop in your life of Mesillat Yesharim, it's a lifetime work. You have to go over and over and over it until it becomes front and center, right? It's very possible that you read this book once, says the Ramchal, and you won't find anything in it. You find no chidushim really that you didn't know before. He said, yeah, I know this. I basically pretty much knew everything. And again, I'm telling you, this is from his humility. You go through this, you'll find thousands of things that you didn't know before, and it didn't occur to you because this is just one of the most profound Sfarim written, and you'll see it for yourself. The real to'elet comes from reading it over and over and focusing on it in a constant and consistent way. Because then you will remember these things that are really pashut, but people forget them because of their nature. And then you'll focus on things that you are obligated to focus on in your life that normally you would forget, simply forget. Now, we had Rabbi Leuchter here this past week. He spoke about Shalom Bayit. He spoke about relationships, right? And he was talking about this family that had problems, like major problems. And he told him, he said, I want you to call your wife 5 times a day. Not to carry a conversation necessarily, a long conversation 5 times a day, but he say, hi, I just want to hear your voice. Maybe the first time maybe you have a conversation, maybe 1 or twice you have a longer conversation, but just a minute phone call. Why? Because you are centralizing her in your life. You're centralizing your husband, your wife, your kids in your life when you have multiple times that you turn to them in your daily life. And that centralizing is something that is magical, because our brains understand what's important. We know, as knowledge based, we know a lot of things. But because those things that are simple are checked automatically in our subconscious brain, we don't focus on them as much as we should, and then they just get pushed back by the urgent matters in life. We don't think, when we think of our family, we don't think, oh, this is urgent. Unless chas v'shalom, they're going to the emergency room, something went wrong, someone broke, fractured, thing fell, something, then it's urgent. But when you think of your supper with your kids, do you think urgent in your brain? No, you don't think it's urgent. So if you have something that's urgent, it pushes it away. But if you ask everybody, your kids are, it's important, more urgent than any urgent, pretty much. But we don't deal with it because, and I'm saying this over and over because this has to become a reality, that the platform of this sefer is, our brain works in such a way that things that are simple, we push back. Unless you constantly bring them front and center on the front burner, and then you will actually live with those priorities in your life. Now he gives examples. Let me give you examples, says the Ramchal. The majority of the world, if someone is smart, and the real intellectualites, Yasimu Rovitman, what do they spend their time and their life doing? What do they do with themselves in their life? Now, he says, Yasimu Rovitman and Avistakirutam Betakut HaChochmot. They put the majority of their time and their effort in the details of different chokhmot, different knowledges, different science subjects. The Omek HaYurim researches, ish kefinet yatzichlo, every person based on what they value in their lives. Now, some people become scientists. Some other people become mathematicians, and they go to nuclear science and other space matters, whatever it is that tickles your interest. Other people in work and business. And then you have the people who choose to excel in limudei kodesh, in Torah. Now, from there, if you're a talented individual and you're learning Torah, what do you become? You become a Rosh Yeshiva, you become Baki in Shas. Oh, this person knows Shas backwards and forwards. The other person is 40 years old and he knows Shulchan Aruch, inside and out. That's how they become, right? Mehem b'midrashim, mehem b'piskei dinim. Different people do different things. When was the last time that you say, oh, this Gaon who has an IQ of over 200, he is a tzaddik, right? Very few people, very few people would say, I am dedicating my life to know what Hashem wants from me. Musar, developing your character, developing your relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not necessarily focused and being famous for knowing Shulchan Aruch and Shas and other things, or becoming a doctor, a lawyer, a surgeon, a business person, a real estate tycoon, or anything else. Ad ha'ahava, but to love of Hashem, ad yir'ah v'al hadvekut v'al kol sha'ar chelkei hachasidut. I'm becoming a chassid, not a chassid with peot. When we're talking about a chassid, a person that's mitchasedim kono, someone that's close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now he goes further than this. If you ask any from Jew, relationship to Hashem versus knowing Shulchan Aruch by heart or Shas by heart for that matter, which one is more important? Well, this was actually, by the way, a machloket that's mentioned in Masechet Eruvin in Daf Yud Gimel. On page 13, the Gemara there says, it was a back and forth. Is learning Torah more important or doing the mitzvot more important? What do you say? Which one is more important? This was a 2-year machloket bet Hillel bet Shammai. It was not simple, right? What do you say, David? Doing is more important, you say. Jonathan, what do you say? Learning more important. See, we have a Jewish community, you have machloket right away. Amazing. What's more important?
Learning is more important for your neshama, but for the purpose of this world.
Well, everyone agrees that you have to do the mitzvot. Nobody disagrees with that, right? Beres, what do you say? Forget both of them, yeah. Because he has machloket. The problem is, it's a circle that you have to know, it's a chicken and the egg. Well, you learn because you want to do the mitzvot. So if you're learning and not doing the mitzvot, what's it good for? But if you are doing the mitzvot, you're not learning, then it doesn't have longevity, right? Next generation, what's going to happen, right? Gemara says, right? Learning is more important because that brings you to doing. It makes it front and center. Education is the most important thing. Fine, amazing. He's not talking about that. He's saying a person that you ask him being close to Hashem, having a relationship with Hashem, if you assume that you're in this world for a reason, and you have a tafkid that your neshama has come in this world, so then what is more important? Mastering Shas and Shulchan Aruch, or having a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Well, everyone would say, of course, having a relationship with Hashem is more important, right? But how many geniuses do you find that they're focusing not on mastering Shas and Poskim and Shulchan Aruch, but they're focusing on in a real way, spending hours on the relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You say, what relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu? I'm doing the mitzvah, I'm a frum Jew, Hazaku Baruch. Next, let me finish my Tosafot over here. That's how everybody thinks. And that's how he's going to explain in this paragraph. Says the Ramchal, nobody will tell you that Im tish'al lahem kol echad yomar shezeh ikar hagadol. Everyone will tell you that this is the most important thing. ושלא ידומה חכם, שיהיה חכם באמת שלא יתבררו אצלו כל הדברים האלה. You won't consider anyone a chacham, a wise man, if these things are not pashut to him. אך מה שלא ירבו לעיין עליו, הוא מפני רוב פרסום הדברים. The reason they don't spend time on it is because everyone says, Rabbi, it's pashut. I have a good relationship with Hashem. I'm doing the mitzvot. I'm learning Torah 18 hours a day. Like, that's relationship, right? What do you want from my life? Let me master my Shas and Poskim. Or for the people who are not in learning, but they are doing business, they're doctors, lawyers, whatever it is. I'm a frum Jew. I'm doing what I have to do. I'm doing whatever a frum person has to do, and of course I have a relationship with Hashem. I daven 3 times a day, or all of that. Leave me alone. What do you mean relationship? Of course I have a relationship. That's what we all think, all of us. Now Ramchal was not a fool. He understood this and he says, I'm telling you, the reason I wrote this is because of this preface to this book. This one thing. Because that is an error in your Yiddishkeit, in your entire perspective on Judaism. Regardless of if you're a businessman, a doctor, a lawyer, or a person that learns Torah 18 hours a day. Doesn't make a difference. And he's going to explain this. Again, we're going to finish Mesillat Hashem, the preface today. So let us go through it. It says, the Ramchal, the reason for it is because it's pashut. It's because it is given. It doesn't seem to them that you have to spend any time on it. So what happens? Who actually sits and learns these types of things? Who sits and focuses on relationship with Hashem and learning Musar? Excuse the language, a bunch of dumb people. That's what he says. Only the people who are not really smart end up spending time on these things. They're almost fools. They're almost, excuse the language, stupid. Those are the people who walk around with their Mesillat Yesharims and Derech Hashems and Orchot Tzadikim, to the degree, says the Ramchal, lo yazuzu mimeno, they won't move an inch from them. Until it's so bad, says the Ramchal, when you see somebody learning Musar a lot, when you see somebody spending time on these things, you automatically think that this guy must not be so smart. And I hate to say this, it is true. For those who are in the trenches of the frum Jewish community, this is exactly, nothing has changed in the past 200 years. You see somebody in yeshiva that has a lot of Musar Sfarim and spends time on them, you're like, this guy must not be good in learning. If he was good in learning, he was finishing Shas, and he was doing those types of things. He was writing and typing Chidushei Torah, writing his Sefer, and doing those things that people do. Successful Talmidei Chachamim do. Or business people even. Those who are, Baruch Hashem, like Los Angeles is changing. In New York you have billionaires and millionaires that they learn Torah, teach Torah. Daf Yomi, Amud Yomi, Shulchan Aruch. They learn 2-3 hours a day. They do business in the rest of the day. The doctors, lawyers, surgeons, whatever it is, and they're very successful in what they do in the secular aspect of their life. But they're Talmidei Chachamim, Mamash Talmidei Chachamim. They've gone to yeshivot and they teach Torah, not just learn Torah. But those sophisticated ones, they're not going to be giving a shiur on Mesillat Yesharim. They're going to be giving a shiur on, the topics that stand on, on the cutting edge of technology, which is also important. They're invigorating, they're interesting. Mesillat Yesharim sometimes not as interesting. So I could read it myself. But it's not a read, says the Mesillat Yesharim. When you see somebody spending time on these things, you think the guy is not smart. Says the Ramchal, the outcome of this minhag that we have is extremely detrimental for our community, for the Jewish community. Why? Both for smart people and for not so smart people. The real connection with Hashem, the real what we call Chassidut, is going to be very difficult to find, because those people who have the brains to actually develop that type of deep understanding of Hashem, they will never spend time on it, because it's like, you don't want to do that. You want to do the high caliber stuff. And those who actually spend time, they don't have the engine up here to actually be able to accomplish it. They think this is Chassidut, but they never understood it well, because they're not smart, unfortunately. Majority of people think Chassid. What does Chassid mean? A greasy person with dirty clothing that is walking with a Tehillim, and his Tehillim is falling apart. He's saying Tehillim all the time, and he is shuckling back and forth in his tefillah. And Viduim Arukim, he's saying Ana for 15 minutes, right? Somot Kashim is fasting all the time. Tefillot Kerach is dipping in Mikveh Arizal 5 times a day. Kulam Devarim, he says, Ramchal says, you know why what I think of these things? Kulam Devarim she'en hasecher nach bahem. He says, my brain doesn't have patience for these things. This is not Chassidut. People think that's what a Chassid means. Absolutely not. Chassidut has zero to do with this. With saying Tehillim and doing Tevilot Kerach and going into ice and rolling on snow and doing all these types of things. Nothing to do with Chassidut. Nothing. And he's going to have an entire chapter on Chassidut, and also on being balanced in Chassidut. Mishkal Chassidut. He's going to speak about, which was one of my favorite chapters of Mesillat Yesharim, which completely denies this notion that people think Chassidut is like doing these types of things. No! Chassidut has nothing to do with these things. He says very strong language. A brain of an intellectual person that's willing to use their intellect will not rest by this notion that people think is Chassidut. Omnam Chassidut ha'amiti ha'nirtzet va'nechmad, the real desired Chassidut is rachok misiyur sichlenu. It's very far from what we envision it to be. Ki zeh davar pashut. Because it's simple. It's something you have never experienced. Lavadata, you can't imagine. Imagine a person that has been Rahman al-Islam blind from birth, and you are trying to explain to them the red color. What are you going to say? Strawberries are red? He's never seen anything. You can't understand something that you have never experienced. If you've never experienced the real Chassidut, if you've never delved into what real connection with Hashem is, you will not understand. You say, what Chassidut? You say, oh, the guy is crying all the time. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Imagine you want to try to explain a taste to someone that doesn't have taste buds. How can you explain it to them? Something that you haven't experienced cannot be fathomed by you until you experience it. And says the Ramchal, unfortunately, most people don't even give it a try. Especially the smart people. Smart people, they say, this stuff's not for me. I do, the big stuff. And I'm from, So this will be neglected, the real thing. Imagine the relationship with your wife. If you could give an example of our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if that's the purpose that we came to this world. So that being neglected is like neglecting the biggest thing in your life, because it's pashut. And again, I'm going back from every angle I can to this core, because that is the core of this preface. the pitfall of being used to something, the pitfall of something that is pashut. When something is simple, you end up not spending time on it. You don't spend time on it, it gets neglected. It gets neglected, you will never experience a real relationship. You could go through a life of Torah and mitzvot, of being a frum Jew, and never have experienced once a real moment of relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is sad. Now, so let's finish this up. Even though that the basic fundamentals of this everyone knows, if you don't actually involve yourself in the study of this, you will see the details of it and you won't even recognize them. You'll pass by them and you won't even know. I will prove to you, says the Ramchal, these things are not natural tendencies. In other words, hunger is a natural thing. You don't ingest food for enough time, you will be hungry, starving, and your body will scream to you that you need food. You're thirsty, your body will tell you you're thirsty, you're tired, you'll just fall apart and you fall asleep. Those are natural instincts of a human being. But these things are not natural. You don't say, I need to learn Musar now. Well, it's not like that. If anything, it's on the contrary. The Pasuk says what? A person is born like a wild mule, right? Our nature is far from attachment to those, unique concepts, esoteric, spiritual concepts. Your body is not going to tell you that you need to do this. It's not natural needs of a body. Until you will automatically acquire them without working on them. People will acquire them if they work and look for them. It's not like your natural instincts and your what you grow up with as your nature that you don't need to work for. Like falling asleep, being tired, or waking up when you're not tired. HaRav, hunger, being full. And all the other things that are natural in our instinct and in our nature. For sure, you need ways to acquire them, and you need techniques and also tachbulot, strategies. You have to strategize how to acquire things. And there will be many things that will prevent you from acquiring those things. Natural, and he's going to set up, the reason he's saying it like this, as we will see, in every chapter, he will tell you the definition of the thing he's talking about is very organized. Then he'll tell you the way to acquire it, and things that stop you, natural blockages that stand in front of you from acquiring them, and how to overcome them. Every chapter is going to be that pattern. So he is kind of like putting those words in right now because he's setting our minds up for the structure that he's going to have in every single chapter of this book. So it says, the Ramchal, there are ways to acquire them, and there are blockages. There are things that would stop you from acquiring them, and it won't be impossible to stop the blockages. You will be able to overcome them. And that's what we're going to be talking about, says the Ramchal. Therefore, how in the world would you think, for a moment, that you won't need to spend time on acquiring something that's not natural to you? Anything that's not natural, you have to spend time on learning it. Anything. You want to learn a business, you have to spend time on it. You want to learn a trade, you have to learn. You want to be a bodybuilder, it's not natural. You're not going to end up with bulging muscles on your own if you don't work on it to develop those muscles. And everything has its muscles. Every trait that you want to learn, you have to actually spend time. I ask you a question. If something is a knowledge, is considered a knowledge, do you have to spend time in learning it? Or is it going to just poof, come into your brain automatically? Is there anybody here that thinks it's automatically going to come to your brain if something is... And the more sophisticated the knowledge... Finish the sentence. The more you have to put time in it. That's pashut. I mean, there's nobody that will even doubt. You laugh at me even saying this because this is a 5-year-old exercise. But the reason I'm doing it is because we take this for granted, even though that the pasuk says this is the knowledge of the word. The pasuk says it, and he's going to bring that. Says the Ramchal. Where do you expect this chokhmah to appear in your mind? If you don't pursue it. And once it's pashut, we just said 2 pages ago that every chacham, every intellectualite knows that it's needed that we should have a connection with Hashem. It's the most important thing. It's the priority in life. So says the Ramchal, if your avodah to Hashem, if your tefillah, if you're putting on tefillin in the morning, or keeping Shabbat on Shabbat, or eating kasher and refraining from tarif, whenever the opportunity comes, if those things are part of your relationship, but it's not nikayon ha'avodah, if you daven and you have no kavanah, if you keep Shabbat and at the end of Shabbat, say Baruch Hashem, it's over, right? That mentality. Is there a relationship? Is that something that Hashem loves? Says the Ramchal, for sure. There's no doubt that that's not wanted by Hashem. And he says even more than that. It's distant and it is disgusting in the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem knows the heart of every person. He knows what goes on in your heart. If you don't have the proper intent and kavanah, what are we going to answer in the day of Yom Adin, so to speak, if we were light in this and we did not focus on it? How are we going to answer it? Now, talking about repeating things that he said in the beginning, one of the Brisker Rav's nephews, he spent his Musar Seder for 20 minutes a day for the entire 40 days, well, it's less than 40 days, of beginning of Elul until Yom Kippurim, and this one sentence. He would sit there, and again, in the beginning you'll laugh at it, but you'll understand. He would close his eyes, and he would sing this sentence, this one sentence of Mesillat Yesharim to himself. Mana ale biyom tochacha. And we go back and forth, because we know all of these things that he says. This guy, the Brisker Rav's nephew, he had learned Mesillat Yesharim 10 times maybe. But he was focusing in one Elul for that 1 year to just reinforce everything that he knew in his brain by making it real, that I have to be accountable in front of Hashem one day for everything that I know, but it's not front and center in my life. That's not the epicenter of my life and my Yiddishkeit. So says the Ramchal, and if we leave alone the thing that's so much upon us, is the main thing that Hashem wants from us. Why is he saying this, by the way? This is a reference to a pasuk. Everything he says, every word he says is references. I'm not focusing time because I'm racing the clock, but this is a pasuk. He says, Moshe Rabbeinu says in the Chumash, V'ata Yisrael, ma Hashem Elokecha shoel meimach. And here, you Jews, what does Hashem want from you? Right? This is $1 million question, right? If I had $1 million, I would be willing to give $1 million to know what Hashem wants from me at the end of my life. The pashut, right? And it says 5 things. Kim, le'ira et Hashem Elokecha, ula'ava oto, lalechet b'chol derachav, v'lishmor mitzvotav, u'dovka bo. It's a ladder that goes up. It says you should love Hashem, you should fear Him, you should keep His mitzvot, go in His pathways. That means emulate Him and what He has told us He wants us to be like. And the pinnacle of the entire thing is u'dovka bo. How do we translate that? Cling to Him, attach yourself to Hashem, which is going to spend time explaining what that means. But that is the main thing Hashem wants from you. It doesn't say finish Shas. That's also important. Doesn't say no Shulchan Aruch by heart. Beautiful. But it's not what Ikar of what Hashem wants is. Ikar of what Hashem wants is have a relationship with Him. If you're keeping Shabbat and you have no relationship, it's disgusting. If you're going to Shiur Torah, I have no relationship with Him, what are you doing? You hear why this is important. We spend zero time. An average Frum Jew spends zero time on a daily basis, sometimes on a weekly basis, sometimes on a monthly basis, on thinking about our relationship with Hashem in a real way. And that's awful. That's a pity. Says the Ramchal, is it possible that we can spend all of our genius talent and our time on things that we are not obligated, and He's going to knock on the people who learn Torah to learn Iyun every Rishon and every Acharon and the Gemara, cases, esoteric things, or things that are never going to happen. Once in a Yovel, the She'elah is going to come up, and you're learning it, spending hours on writing a tshuva and learning those types of things in the yeshiva. Asher lo yetze lanu shum peri mehem v'dinim asher enam shayachim lanu, halachot that don't even apply. But something that we are obligated towards our Creator, such an obligation, we're going to leave it as a hergel, just leave it as a mitzvat anashim melumada, means a mechanical, robotic thing. That's how we're going to do it. Let me pause here, because I'm not going to have time to do justice to this paragraph. Or pause here and just explain what he's hinting over here. Again, as I said, every sentence is a hint to something which he assumes we know. But we are Amei Haaretz, based on his standards of a regular Jew. So I'll try to explain this. This is a pasuk in Yeshaya Navi. Yeshaya Navi says something very scary. There's one place in Tanakh that I know that such a strong language is mentioned about anything. Right? The words that you have in the Chumash, in the Klalot, in the curses of the Parashat Kitavo, 98 of them, it says Ve'ifla Hashem et makotcha ve'et makot zaracha. Hashem will give you Chas v'shalom, Chalila, Bar Minan, Bar Mikim, will give you unbelievable plagues. Hifla Pele. Pele is unbelievable. Unbelievable. But then there's one place in Tanakh, only one, that says, I will give you a super duper unbelievable plague. A double language. Hafle vafele. Vehirbeti et makod ha'am hazeh hafle vafele, says Yeshaya Navi. I will give plagues that will be unbelievable, super unbelievable. Hafle vafele, 2 languages of Pele. Why? Now you think to yourself, must have been that they did horrible. They were doing avodah zarah, gilui arayot. No. You know why? Read the pasuk before, and I'll quote. This is exactly verbatim what the pasuk says, based on my memory. It says, "Ya'an ki nigash ha'am hazeh elai bisfata bepiv, ubisfatav kibeduni velibo rachak mimeni." It says, because I'll do this, because this nation comes close to me with their mouth. Ubisfatav kibeduni, literally translated, with their lip service. They respect me. Velibo, their heart, rachak mimeni, it's far. Mitzvat anashim melumada, and their fear of me, their doing of the mitzvot is mitzvat anashim melumada, is a robotic, mechanical doing of the mitzvot, without a heart, without passion, without a thought process, as a lifestyle of the walk and talk the talk type of Judaism. It says, because of that, I'm going to take away their hachamim. That's the following pasuk. Okay, imagine that. Hashem says, I wish somebody comes and closes the doors of my Beit HaMikdash. I don't want your avodah. Can you imagine that? You think that the worst nation ever, the worst time of our nation ever. But it's not true, because it says, Shabbatchem u'ma'adechem gala nafshi. I don't want you to give Shabbat HaMoed. So they were keeping Shabbat HaMoed. Why are you bringing so much korbanot? You know what the korban means? You bring a korban olah. How much is a cow nowadays in the black market? $5,000, $10,000? And you have to schlep it. You can't even transportation. You have to schlep the thing. Rov zivchachem, they were bringing many korbanos. I don't want it. Beparischem kapechem ali menai. When you daven to me, I close my eyes, Hashem says. So they were davening. Yom ki tarbu tefillah ineni shomea. You daven a lot. I'm not listening. So davening a lot. They're doing all these things. I don't want it. Why I don't want it? Because there is no heart. Because you didn't do this few pages of the beginning of Mesillat Yesharim. The Judaism becomes something you do, not something you experience. It's not a manifestation of a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because we don't care about it, because we don't think it's important. We think it's pashut. It's pashut. Therefore, says Ramchal, we leave it to mitzvat arashim elumada. He's, with those two words, he's hinting to this whole spiel that I told you from Pasuk in Yeshaya. And if we don't do it, it's not automatically going to be created in our brains. Now, next week, B'ezrat Hashem, we're going to finish this, and he's going to give the remedy of how we deal with this. This is a pitfall. It's a pitfall that I personally, and I'm not ashamed to say it, I'm a subject to this, I'm a victim of this, because of our busy lives. So how do you deal with this problem? How do we go about fixing this is something that B'ezrat Hashem will continue in the next year.